This is America, and this is the Syrian embassy here in Washington, D.C. Having been locked out for so many years, relationships between the USA and Syria are now rapidly warming, with the US president championing Syria's new leader, a former militant Islamist who helped topple one of the Middle East's most brutal dictators. We'll be asking why Donald Trump's so keen to have Ahmed al-Sharaa on side. First, though, let's go to our Washington, D.C. studio and Alex Marquardt.
Thanks, Richard. The U.S. is transforming its relationship with Syria, one of the most consequential countries in the Middle East. After years of isolation during Syria's war, Donald Trump has met the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, 4 times after he and his fighters stormed Damascus and toppled the Assad dictatorship in late 2024. Now, sanctions are being lifted and billions of dollars in investment could be coming in. But that may come at a steep cost for Damascus. Trump wants Syria to take on Hezbollah in Lebanon, to negotiate a security agreement with Israel, and to step out of Russia's shadow. Richard Gaisford explains how we got here.
Greeted by Syrians in Washington as a conquering hero. There's no doubting Syria's new president scores highly in the game of public relations. Ahmed al-Sharaa, alongside his foreign minister, has been seen shooting a few hoops with senior US military leaders and sharing the smell of success with Donald Trump at the White House. Al-Sharaa's quickly won the US president's approval.
He's respected by everybody, including me.
After a near 14-year-long civil war that brought destruction to Syria and divided its people, its former president, Bashar al-Assad, was forced from power, fleeing to Russia, bringing his family's 53-year reign to an end. Assad's successor is a former militant Islamist who had led the uprising against him. Ahmed al-Sharaa was quick to swap his military fatigues for a suit, promising to bring factions together and persuade foreign nations to trust Syria, quickly working to get sanctions dropped. The softly spoken president's now focused on removing Syria's designation as a state sponsor of terrorism, in place since 1979.
Syria must be cleared of all the laws that shackle it, a path that President Trump, to his credit, has taken.
The US president seems keen to help.
Mr. President, are you going to remove Syria from the state sponsor of terrorism list?
I think I will, yeah.
But might be looking for assistance of his own.
Do you still want Syria to help with Hezbollah in Lebanon?
It could help, we'll find out. I think we're making a lot of progress.
But there's no sign that Syria's new leadership wants to get involved in conflicts outside of its own borders. Well, you'll find the Syrian embassy here in the heart of this exclusive neighborhood in Washington, D.C. And looking at the grounds, it probably does need just a little bit of attention. The foreign minister did pop by last year to raise the flag for the first time in more than a decade. And since then, the American government's been showing the Syrians quite a lot of love, having locked them out for so many years. American officials have been keen to pull their new friend away from Russia, which had bolstered Syria for years under Bashar al-Assad, as the country suffered the pressures of US sanctions. That relationship might not be dead, but Russia has withdrawn forces from Syria, reducing its footprint in the Middle East, as the US increases its presence, still to work out how Syria fits into the complex jigsaw it's created. Richard Gaisford, Al Jazeera, Washington, D.C.
To break down where relations between Syria and the U.S. stand and where they're headed, I'm joined now in the studio by Ambassador William Roebuck. He's a former U.S. Deputy Special Envoy for the Global Coalition Against ISIS, and Alzayat, who is a former Senior Middle East Advisor at the United Nations mission under the Obama administration. Ambassador Weil, thank you so much for being with me today. I want to start with the news. We have Tom Barrack, who is Trump's special envoy for Syria, who maintains the ties with Damascus. He is criticizing Israel for a bombing of a Syrian airbase, and he tweeted a rather remarkable statement today. He called it an unnecessary escalation that does not advance regional stability. He says the al-Sharaa government has neither adopted a predatory posture nor maintained proxy forces. It has, in fact, repeatedly indicated a preference for de-escalation with Israel. So while This bombing was at a base that's in the north, in Idlib province, so very far from the Israeli border. How much do you think this complicates the American efforts to try to stabilize Syria?
I think it complicates it, though the administration is predetermined to see their project in Syria succeed, which is to stabilize it, to ensure that groups such as ISIS do not return, and that the country is able to provide for its citizens in a stable manner and a sustainable manner. Though it does complicate it, Israel is an important ally of the United States, the closest ally of the U.S., and it's putting, I think, a lot of pressure on those goals. And you're seeing that, I think, expressed through the statements from Ambassador Barak, who has consistently advised the Israelis to de-escalate and to support negotiated settlements for whatever outstanding issues there may be between the two sides.
And crucial to note that Israeli forces are occupying a significant stretch of land in southern Syria. There hasn't been much in the way of an official explanation from the Israelis. Fox News did get a statement from a senior Israeli official saying that this bombing was based on highly sensitive intelligence that was shared with the United States in advance. They go on to say that Sharaa, the president, understands that he cannot operate and maintain proxy forces like the previous Syrian regime, and they allow for the fact that he didn't understand what was going on or didn't know what was going on. Ambassador Roebuck, do you believe that the U.S. knew that this was going to happen, and this slap on the wrist, if you will, from Ambassador Barak, will that do anything to the Israelis?
I don't know exactly if they knew what was going on, but I think take the Israelis at the word that they shared some sort of intelligence with the United States. I think one reason that the American government probably had such a harsh reaction is that this is very far from the border down south with Israel and in Syria through the disengagement zone. And I think you're way up near the border with Turkey. And it may be seen in some ways as a signal to Turkey as much as it is some sort of concern on Israel's part with what the Sharaa government's doing with a proxy force. I understand that base was not very active. It was manned in order just for security purposes. But I suspect the U.S. government, as Weil was saying, they're focused on their project in Syria, and I think they looked at this as really an obstacle to that.
Do you think the administration will use any of its capital with the Israelis to actually get them to restrain themselves? Because obviously they've got a lot of other priorities when it comes to Israel.
Hard to say. There's not a long history of the U.S. using a ton of capital to restrain Israel, but I think they do feel very strongly about Syria. I think they feel like they have a better interpretation of what is happening there and what the possibilities are. So we'll see. It's important that the U.S. maintain some leverage, I think, on Israel. Their response towards Syria from the beginning, when the Assad regime fell, has been it has been surprisingly harsh, a little hard to interpret sometimes, just how strongly they have responded in ways that do not respond directly to a perceived threat.
Let's talk about the broader relationship. It has been a remarkable blossoming of a friendship between the two presidents, a bit of a bromance. We've heard a lot of nice things said by the American president about Ahmed al-Sharaa. I noted earlier in the show they've met some 4 times. Wael, how do you see the progress in this burgeoning relationship between Washington and Damascus?
Look, as a Syrian American and someone who worked on the file at the State Department during, let's say, the dark years of the Syrian civil war, this is surreal. I mean, I never imagined we would live to see a day like this where the president of the U.S. is spraying cologne on, and someone with the background of Ahmed al-Sharaa. But that goes to show that the U.S. always favored a stable Syria, given where it is in the region, and legitimately wants a different relationship with the country. It just could not think of what those options would be post-Assad, and the Syrian people have presented that now to the U.S. Ahmed al-Sharaa and his administration have very smartly navigated Washington in terms of understanding what the priorities are, whether it is maintaining stability with the regional countries, internal stability, treatment of minorities, as well as the cooperation and partnership against global terrorist organizations. Syria is now a member of the global coalition to combat Daesh, and to also commit to getting rid of whatever remains of their chemical weapons that Assad had before, which they have been cooperating with the UN on. So on all those points, they've delivered. And they have, quite frankly, surprisingly, been very patient and turned the other cheek, in fact, to over 1,000 attacks by the Israelis and the acquiring of more, the occupation of more Syrian lands and the killing of more Syrian civilians at a time where the country needs an opportunity to reintegrate into the global economy and the world. And so I think that's been rewarded correctly. So beyond the personal relationships that we're seeing and the bromance, as you mentioned, I think there's a new strategic partnership being built that we're witnessing.
What remains, Ambassador, that each side would like from the other?
Well, the biggest thing that the Syrians need from the U.S., and it's underway, is the lifting of the state sponsorship of terrorism, SST for short. It sounds like just a couple of sentences, an accusation, but it is in fact a legal designation that ties up all sorts of financial arrangements, banking arrangements, the ability to get even things like arbitration systems in place, the type of stuff you need to do big investment deals and infrastructure deals that Syria needs. This is under notification process with Congress. Hopefully it will occur in the next month or so, and a lot of this type of financial arrangement can occur. I think this is what the Syrians need the most, and then they want the broader relationship with the United States, the diplomatic relationship. I think they want to strengthen the military relationship. They're already working with the global coalition against ISIS, and that is also shaping, I think, the bilateral military relationship. On the U.S. side, I think they're pushing for these jihadist militias, especially the foreign fighters, not to be included in the Syrian military that they're building. I think they're pushing, the United States is pushing for some of these groups to be actually expatriated out of Syria. I think that's a big demand, that type of demand. And then there's maybe a general sort of oversight or a concern that the military developments in Syria, the relations with the SDF, the Kurdish integration into the army, that these things stay on track and that they go in a way that is conducive for Syria's development, but also for U.S. interests.
Well,
I just think, yeah, and I agree with what the ambassador said. We just have to, remind ourselves that's only been a year and a half, and where Syria was, where it is today. I mean, I was just in Syria for a month. It was my 5th visit, and you see Sidnaya prison, what it represented, and the lives that were lost there, all the unresolved issues, not to mention the rubble that still has not been picked up from throughout the country. Hundreds of thousands of housing units are still in ruin, and 6 million people, largely, speaking, are still displaced within the country, and about 5 million still outside of it. In spite of that, a lot of progress has been made, but the U.S. Really is holding the key right now regarding a vote of confidence in terms of engaging with Syria, of investing in Syria, of reintegrating it into the global economy. We've seen, because of the war right now with Iran, Syria can be part of the solution to diversify the export of oil and gas from the region. And folks are looking at its geopolitical location now with new lenses. So there's a lot of opportunities there, but the country needs a lot of direct assistance, development aid, at a time where development aid has shrunk tremendously. The country needs about $200 billion to rebuild. And investment, aid, assistance, political support, and the U.S. has traditionally been a leader in this area, and I think they're going to need that more than ever to encourage others, whether they are private or public sector stakeholders, whether in Europe or in Asia or elsewhere. And the window is now. I mean, this government right now in Damascus has to show that it's delivering for its people. Otherwise, all those issues that we're talking about, minorities, the SDF, the situation in Sweden, etc., if you add economic pressures on that, it could really become a real problem.
Does it show that it has to be delivering for Washington as well? Because there have been some significant requests from the Trump administration. And one of the most extraordinary ones is roping in Syria to help disarm Hezbollah. And that's not something that Sharaa has rejected in any kind of full-throated way, but he certainly has demurred and has indicated that that's not really going to happen. How much, Ambassador, do you think that that's a sticking point?
I'm just sort of interpreting the tea leaves in the media, but I don't sense it's a significant sticking point. My sense is that behind the scenes, I think the Syrian government has been pretty forthright that this is not something that they can take on, that they have the capability to take on or the interest to take on. I think the Trump administration mentioned it. I don't think that they are pushing it that hard. It just seems a little far-fetched, really, to me, to be pushed very hard as a significant option. But we'll see how it plays out.
Washington also wants to see, obviously, a deal between the Syrians and the Israelis, and Sharaa has said that he's open to a deal, as you pointed out. Well, there have been a lot of attacks from the Israeli side. How much pressure is the U.S. putting on that point, and how likely do you think it is to come to fruition?
I think there's been certainly U.S. Encouragement and facilitation of these dialogues between the two sides. There's been direct negotiations between them now for several months. I don't know where they stand right now, but I would categorize it as real pressure right now for the Syrians all of a sudden to relinquish their claim on the Golan Heights or to enter into a full peace treatment. I think where everyone is at is agreeing to disengage, to perhaps return to the original lines of separation, and then continue discussions and negotiations with certain assurances on the security side. I think that's where the administration is. That's where it seems to have landed. And I agree with the ambassador. I think you simply will not be able to convince, in my opinion, President Sharaa or the Syrian people that it's wise to enter Lebanon at this point. The population is squarely focused, from my experience on the ground, in rebuilding the country, in staying out of the business of others in the neighborhood, whether from Iraq to Jordan to Lebanon and Israel. And their president understands that, and he may demur here and there, but I see no evidence of them planning to enter Lebanon anytime in the future.
But even if it wants to stay out of the business of others, it is geographically at the crossroads of a number of different countries. And obviously with Iran and Hezbollah so active these days, to what extent has Sharaa done what the U.S., what Washington would like him to do in terms of preventing weapons and other resources from reaching Hezbollah through Syria?
My sense is that they're doing a pretty good job. I don't know the details down on that border. I don't think weapons transmission is a big issue for the Syrian government right now. I don't think it's a big part of that dialogue, but it's clearly going to be a subject that the U.S. government is always going to raise this and be concerned about it. Maybe not that the Syrian government is doing it, but that they're a little too lax on some groups that could be involved in it. The big issue for that type of thing is that it's probably going to be primarily smuggling type activity. Right. The real motor behind it was Iran, and the changes in Syria that have occurred in the last year and a half have basically destroyed Iran's influence in Syria. Their military presence collapsed, their diplomatic presence collapsed, and this is a huge advantage for the region, for the Levant region, but also for the Gulf and for the broader region, because it has, as bad as the situation is with the Iran war against the Gulf, it would be far worse if Iran actually had the same base and position of influence in Syria that it had 2 years ago. It would be able to basically put the Gulf countries into a pincer, and it would increase Iran's influence throughout the Levant and in Lebanon. We don't have that now.
I do want to take a closer look at the significant sanctions that Syria has been dealing with for quite some time. The U.S. has been dismantling its sanctions against Syria after more than 4 decades. Here's Alex Barrett, who breaks it down.
Just before the fall of Bashar al-Assad under that Syrian flag, Syria was one of the most heavily sanctioned countries on the planet. Damascus was first named a state sponsor of terrorism by Washington in 1979, and over the next 4.5 decades, the United States would hit Syria with all of that. And that's a lot. Then came December 2024, the dramatic fall of the Assad regime and the end of the Syrian civil war. Despite the newly formed caretaker government under Ahmed al-Sharaa, the country was still facing a wall of American sanctions. But little by little, over 2025, that wall came apart. First off, we had Joe Biden in January authorize some transactions with the new government. And then Trump took back the White House and in May announced a 180-day waiver of sanctions imposed by Congress under the Caesar Act. The next month, Trump dismantled the core of the sanctions program with one of his famous executive orders. And later in the year, ordinary commercial goods were given the green light to be sold and foreign assets were freed up. And finally, the foundation of that full sanctions program, although already waived, was officially repealed in December. Syria now almost completely free of those US sanctions. But keyword, almost. The president is now obliged to give 180-day compliance reports for the next 4 years to certify that Damascus is playing ball. And then there's that state sponsor of terrorism label. Now, last month, the president got the ball rolling, notifying Congress he's going to ditch the label and opened up a 45-day notification window. And it's looking like Trump will follow through.
Why wouldn't I? He's done a great job.
And that's important because that's the last formal restriction in place on Syria. And that 45 days is nearly up.
So that state sponsor of terrorism label, one of the final hurdles, Ambassador. You were just talking about the Syrian economy. How much of a boost has it seen as a result of the lifting of these sanctions? What more needs to be done?
It's definitely seen a boost. The World Bank, for example, has committed nearly $400 million for energy, housing, health projects. Others are coming in, especially from the Gulf. Where I think there's still a lag is the private sector investments. You've seen some big announcements, big deals, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and others, which is a good sign. But we're hoping that with the state sponsor of terror designation removed, that banks, U.S. commercial banks, will start funding projects in Syria, which has not happened directly so far, which you need for any capital expenditures in the country. You also see the big tech companies, the Googles and the Amazons and OpenAIs of the world, allowing their technologies to work in Syria. They currently do not. You can't use ChatGPT in Syria without VPN, for example, or access go on Expedia and book a flight. And so those things need to happen to get businesses moving, to get the commercial activities moving. I think they will. I'm part of the US-Syria Business Council, and that's a big focus of ours right now, is to get both the banking and the tech sectors involved in Syria.
How much resistance to this opening economically to Syria, Ambassador, are you seeing from perhaps certain segments of the administration or folks on Capitol Hill?
There's, I think, no opposition from the administration. I think on Capitol Hill, there's still some concerns, and they're making efforts. I think they inserted some language into the National Defense Authorization Act a couple of months ago about these issues I mentioned: foreign fighters, making sure they weren't integrated into the military, and making sure that some of these the worst were expatriated out of Syria. So that is a concern in certain pockets of Congress. But the administration is, I think, very bullish on Syria. And I'll be honest, just as an aside, an important aside, you have to give the Trump administration a ton of credit for what they've done overall for their Syria policy over the last year and a half and counting. The policy has been highly pragmatic. It has been innovational. Tom Barak has done a great job as President Trump's envoy, and they have gotten a lot of things done. And President Trump has used his prestige and his bully pulpit and pushed Congress far faster and ahead of where Congress wanted to move, I think, and got a lot of these building blocks for lifting sanctions that your reporter mentioned.
There's so many issues that really a small group of people around Trump are handling right now, whether it's the war in Iran, Ukraine, Gaza. It is interesting to hear you talk about how much progress is being made on the Syrian front. Well, where do you think Syria ranks in terms of a priority for the Trump administration? Are they spending enough time thinking about it?
Yeah, it's certainly a priority. I think with the war on Iran, obviously the attention now is more on that war. Gaza still needs to be rebuilding. That conflict hasn't ended, despite claims to otherwise. You've had situations in Latin America as well develop that they've had to turn their attention to. Syria is probably somewhere around there, and it's part of the piece of the puzzle for the greater Middle East. I think it's getting enough attention, but I also admire what Ambassador Barak has accomplished, which is also pretty historic in terms of the speed of which he's moved and the partnership he has not only with President Trump but President Sharaa as well and the regional allies. But in a way, it can become a bottleneck as well, right? The institutions of the State Department and the administration have been hollowed out. And it shows sometimes things move a little bit slowly, and there are subjects that are not really looked into as much, in terms of support for small, medium enterprises in Syria, the quality of governance in Syria that's emerging, the transparency and the equity that this new Syria is offering to its citizens, right? Well, on the political and economic piece. I think there are areas for attention. And now is the time really to invest to make sure that the new Syria is one that, makes those who sacrifice so much for it proud.
We only have about a minute left, but Ambassador, you spent a lot of your time on the ISIL issue, and Trump ordered American troops out of Syria. What has been the effect there, and to what extent is CENTCOM still focused on the issue?
CENTCOM's still very focused on it. ISIS is greatly diminished as a threat compared to what it was 2 years, 5 years, 7 years ago, but it still remains a threat. They have removed the U.S. troops, which I think was maybe good timing in the way they did it. The integration piece with the Kurds is underway. It's not perfect, but it seems to be moving in the right direction. And CENTCOM remains very focused on it. My understanding is they overfly parts of Syria. They have implicit permission from the Syrian government to do it. They use drones. They have some off-state ability to take operations against ISIS leaders. So it's active.
Well, we have to wrap it up there. This has been one of the most extraordinary components of Trump's foreign policy. So, Alzayat and Ambassador William Roebuck, thank you both very much. And that's all for myself and the team here in Washington. I want to hand it back to Richard Gaisford and Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha.
Well, that's it for this edition of This is America. We'll be back on Wednesday looking at Donald Trump and the future of America's key alliances. That's going to be at 18:30 GMT, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time here in the United States. For now, though, from outside the Syrian embassy in Washington, it's goodbye.